I was driving around this week, and 2 times I was driving around. I like to listen to the radio in the car while I'm driving. I'm old-fashioned. And 2 times this week, I heard ads for MapQuest. Yeah, I hear laughs, because who remembers MapQuest? All right, if you're under 30, you probably have no idea what MapQuest is. With MapQuest, MapQuest was invented kind of at the beginning of the internet era for regular people like you and me, mid-90s. MapQuest was started. You can go onto their website, if you don't know what this is, and you could type in your location and the destination you wanted to get to, and MapQuest would print out for you step-by-step instructions to get where you want to go. So if you're under 30, now you know what that is. And you would print this out on your paper, and you would hop in your car, and you would start driving, and you would pray that you didn't make a wrong turn somewhere or miss a turn, right? Because if you missed a turn with your MapQuest printout, it didn't help you to get back where you needed to go. You were kind of stuck. If you're directionally challenged like I am, you're lost. And it's a bad thing. Now we just use Google Maps. It was just so weird to hear a MapQuest commercial on the radio. We use Google Maps to get where we want to go now, right? Or Apple Maps or whatever app it is on your phone that has saved so many marriages. They have saved my marriage, right? They've saved yours, because we don't fight as much about directions anymore. Google Maps is nice because it adjusts things for us as we go, right? If I make a wrong turn, it just says recalculating or whatever, and it gets us back to the path where we should be. But so I love Google Maps, but have you ever been following your Google Maps instructions and Google tells you to turn somewhere where you didn't expect? Have you ever had that happen? I had this happen by accident once. Maybe I told you about this. It's a long story. I don't have time. Every once in a while, Google Maps will tell you to make a turn that you don't expect to go on. It'll send you off the highway, right? Or a side road that I don't normally drive down through those woods or those back roads. Maybe it seems like it's going to be a longer way to you if you take that turn. And when it tells you to do that, you've usually got a quarter mile or half mile until you get to the road, right, where it wants you to turn. And in that half mile, you have the opportunity to make a decision. Am I going to trust this machine, or am I going to ignore it? I have learned over the years to ignore Google at my peril, right? Because if you ignore Google, almost all the time, you're going to end up in a traffic jam, or there's going to be a bridge out somewhere, and if you don't do what Google says, you'll end up at the wrong place. You've got to have a choice. Am I going to do what this machine says, or am I going to ignore it? Sometimes that's what following Jesus feels like, to me anyways. Sometimes Jesus starts leading in a direction that you don't expect, and you're not sure that you can trust it. And so you're saying things like, God, I don't understand what you're doing here in my life. I'm trying to do what you want, but I don't understand where it is that you're wanting me to go. You're not meeting my expectations. I'm praying for something, but I'm not seeing any kind of response or any kind of answer. I'm following you, but my life isn't getting easier. God, I've been praying for a breakthrough in whatever this area of your life is, and instead all I'm getting is silence. This isn't what I signed up for. What's the deal? That's a big question, and it's a valid question. When Jesus doesn't do what I expect, can I still trust him? That's a hard question. One of the reasons I think that we struggle to trust Jesus in the middle of unmet expectations is because sometimes we misunderstand him. We think we know what he's doing. We think we know how he should work. We think we know what following him is supposed to look like. We think we know where the GPS should send us, and then we get sent off in a different direction. And when that happens, it can make trust break down between us and God at times, because it's hard, because it doesn't make any sense to us. And this is something that can get even worse, because sometimes the people who are the closest to Jesus, this is such a weird thing, the people who are closest to Jesus are the ones who misunderstand him the most. We see this all the time in the gospel accounts. We see it all the time with the disciples. There's something that happens to Jesus' disciples in their lives over and over. We're going to talk today about one specific example from Palm Sunday, which is today is Palm Sunday and kind of in the Christian calendar, and we'll talk about why here in just a minute. But it's the Sunday before Easter, the Sunday before Good Friday. And there's this account of something that happens on Palm Sunday called the triumphal entry, all right? And this is a big deal in the life of Jesus. It's one of just a few events in Jesus' life that all four gospel writers include in their account of Jesus' life. And we're going to look at the one out of Luke 19. So if you have your Bible, I would love for you to go ahead and turn there in your Bible, Luke 19. And this account of what happens in this triumphal entry, I think it shows a bunch of people who are close to Jesus. They're around him all the time. They think that they understand. They think that he knows what they're up to. Because by the time we get to this moment in Luke 19, all these people have seen tons of miracles. They've seen tons of healing. They've heard Jesus teach about all kinds of things. Lazarus has just been brought back from the dead, okay? And he's running around out there telling everybody, hey, I was dead, but 0 out of 10, I do not recommend that, but Jesus raised me, brought me back from the dead. And so this crowd is really starting to swarm around Jesus in Luke 19. People are excited about all kinds of stuff that he's doing. They kind of feel like they've got hope that they haven't had in a long, long time. And yet, in this Palm Sunday moment, they still miss him. Why? Because he doesn't meet their expectations of what they think he should be like. In so many ways, Jesus doesn't do what they think he ought to. Who is Jesus anyway? That's the question that we've been asking over this past month. Who is Jesus? He's lots of things. We've seen that Jesus is a teacher with incredible intellectual credibility. I mean, the things that he talks about, they work when we put them into practice. Jesus is a friend of sinners. Jesus is the Son of God. And on Palm Sunday, the Sunday before he's crucified, we're going to see that Jesus is king. That's what the crowds would tell you. Jesus is king. And they're right. They're right. But he didn't show up like the kind of king that they expected. I'm going to show you what I mean today. Luke 19, we're going to start in verse 29. If you were to go back 11 chapters, way back to Luke 9, Luke tells us very specifically that Jesus, kind of in that point in time in his life, he set his face toward Jerusalem. He set his mindset. He set everything that he did from Luke 9 on was pointed towards him going to Jerusalem and having this confrontation with the Jewish leaders in their capital city. Way back in Luke 9. So 11 chapters later, Luke 19, he's almost to Jerusalem. He's just a couple of miles away. And what's it going to look like? What's it going to look like when he actually marches in there? We call it the triumphal entry, right? If you've been around church for a long time, you've heard that term before. The triumphal entry, when Jesus enters into Jerusalem. Here's how Luke describes it. Verse 29 is where we're going to start. As Jesus approached Bethphage and Bethany, that's two villages, all right, at the hill called the Mount of Olives. These two villages are on the east side of the Mount of Olives. Okay, so it's Bethany and Bethphage over here. The Mount of Olives is here, and then over on the west side is Jerusalem. So you got these two villages, a mountain or a hill in between, and then Jerusalem over here. As he approached Bethphage and Bethany at the hill called the Mount of Olives, he sent two of his disciples, saying to them, "Go to the village, go to Bethany ahead of you, and as you enter it," Jesus says, "you will find a colt there, which no one has ever ridden." We actually talked about this a few months ago, if you remember. This is not a horse. This is a donkey, a young donkey, okay? So Jesus says, you're going to find a donkey tied there, which nobody has ever ridden. Untie it, Jesus says, and bring it to me. If anyone asks you, "Why are you untying this thing?" then say, "The Lord needs this donkey." Now there's a little detail about this whole donkey thing that Luke doesn't include when he tells us this story, but one of the other gospel writers do. I think of this interaction between Jesus and his disciples and these donkey owners, I think of that as weird. I don't know if you do or not. It's just weird that Jesus sends two people to go take this donkey, right, and bring it back so that he can ride. I think of that as weird. Like, for instance, I would never even dream of coming to your house and hopping into your car and just driving off without asking. I mean, it's a weird thing. But you need to understand, in Jesus' day, this is a relatively common thing. This is not unheard of at all, especially with government officials. Okay, so we're talking about kings and governors and generals and people who are in charge. If somebody like that in Jesus' day comes along and they decide that they want to come along and take your animal so that they can go for a ride, they could do that whenever they wanted. There was nothing you could do about it. You couldn't say, you couldn't argue with them. They just had the right to come in and do that. We call that eminent domain, right? Where they come in and take our land or take our whatever, put it on a sidewalk, and they take 10 feet of our yard or whatever. We call it this is eminent domain, donkey style, okay? They don't have to ask. They can just come in and take it. There's nothing you can do about it. Verse 32. Those who were sent ahead, these two guys sent ahead by Jesus, went and they found this donkey just as he had told them it would be there. Verse 33. As they were untying the colt, the donkey, its owners asked them, "Hey, why are you untying this colt?" They replied, "The Lord needs it." Now, Mark tells us a tiny little detail that Luke decided to leave out. I don't know why Luke left it out, but he did. Mark says that Jesus told him, if anybody asks you about this donkey and why you're taking it, then you just say, not just the Lord needs it, but Jesus says you tell them the Lord needs it and will send it back shortly. That's weird. That's weird. Kings, which Jesus is, and we're going to see that in a few minutes, kings have absolute rights. They don't have to ask permission for anything. They tell people what to do. There's nothing that you can keep from a king. You can't hide anything from a king. They have total authority, right? And there have been many, many, many kings and rulers over the years who have taken advantage of that. They take your money, they take your sons and send them off to war, they take your property, they take. Jesus, who is he? He's a king. We're going to read it in just a minute. What kind of king is Jesus? He's not what they expected. He's not what they expected. Most kings are takers. Jesus doesn't take. He borrows this donkey. He borrows it. That's odd. Okay? That's different. I think that they didn't get it. Verse 35. They brought this donkey to Jesus. They threw their cloaks on the colt, and they put Jesus on it. As they went along, they start walking the road from Bethany up the Mount of Olives to head towards Jerusalem. As they went along, people spread their cloaks on the road. Now, Luke tells this story super simply. The other gospel writers give us more detail. For instance, Matthew says that this is not just people. This is a large crowd, he says. John says it's a great crowd. And it's not just these cloaks that they're laying out on the road. The other gospel writers tell us that they go out in the fields and they chop off palm branches, okay? And they bring those to this whole road scene, and they're waving branches in the air, and they're hollering and yelling and hooting, and then they're taking these branches and they're laying those down on the road also, along with these cloaks, so that this donkey doesn't have to walk in the mud, doesn't have to walk in the dirt. This is red carpet treatment, okay? That's essentially what this is, red carpet. So imagine the Academy Awards and all these VIPs and these beautiful people, they pull up in their limos and they step out onto the red carpet, right? And they start walking down, and what are photographers doing? Taking pictures, and they stop every 20 feet or whatever, and they do an interview with somebody, and there's people who are there cheering and yelling, and yeah, super glad. This is what that is. That's what's happening in these simple words that Luke is giving. That kind of parade that happens with Jesus, this triumphal entry, is nothing new. It's odd to us, but it's nothing new to them. The Romans invented parades like this many, many, many years before this ever happened. And guess what that Roman parade was called? a triumphus. That's the Latin word for it. I'm not a Latin guy. I just looked this up and read it. Okay, I'm not smart that way. Triumphus is the name of what this parade is called. It's a victory parade. And they had lots and lots of these because they had conquered, the entire Mediterranean area. And so they would have a conquering general. It's kind of a picture of artist's rendition of what it might look like. They have this conquering general, this king, who rides back into a city after winning a mighty battle, mighty war. He rides back into a city. He's on a war horse, right? Or maybe he's riding in a chariot, and he's coming along. He's got all these symbols of authority. He's got flags, and there's pennants waving in the air, right? And people shouting and hollering, and he's got soldiers that are coming along with him. And the soldiers are dragging chains behind him with captives, right, in their train. He's got all this kind of stuff, all for one reason: to show that Rome is in control. Rome is the boss. We are the champs. We are the victors. And so you compare that picture that you just saw with Jesus, and think about the irony. Think about the difference there. Here comes Jesus. He's the king. You're going to see it in just a second. He's the king of the Jews, riding into his home city, Jerusalem, right? And how's he riding in? Not on a war horse. He's riding in on a donkey. And it's not just a donkey. It's a borrowed donkey that he's going to send back later that day. There is nothing about that kind of entry that shouts power and authority, is there? I don't think that there is. This is a king. It's just not the kind of king that anybody expected. He doesn't come with power. He comes with humility. Okay? And so kind of picture in your mind, if you can, this huge parade coming out of Bethany, very large crowd, a great crowd, and they start heading up this Mount of Olives, following the road toward Jerusalem. Jesus is on his donkey, and there's people lining the roads, and they've got branches and their cloaks, and they're surging. One of the gospel writers says they're surging in front of him, and they're behind him. They're all around him, because not only is this Jesus' moment, this is their moment too. This is the moment that they've been waiting for, when their king is going to march into Jerusalem, and he's going to take over. He's going to kick out the nasty Romans, and they're going to put in the rightful ruler of Israel over this land that God had promised their forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, all those years ago. This is everything that they've been waiting for. So they're super pumped up, right? There's this surge, tremendous amount of energy. And they're climbing up the mountain, just shouting the whole way. And they're almost to the place where the road stops climbing, right? Where they're going to get ready to crest the Mount of Olives. And when you hit that peak in the road, if you're a hiker, you kind of know this feeling, right? Of stepping over the peak and you got this giant view. Or maybe you've been driving through the mountains and you're driving, over, whatever mountain in Colorado, and you get to the top and you look out and you just see for hundreds of miles. That's kind of what happens when you crest the Mount of Olives on this road. And you hit the top, and there's Jerusalem, the whole city laid out right in front of you. And when they get to this point, they cannot hold back any longer. Look at verse 37. Can't hold back. When Jesus came near the place where the road starts to go down, the Mount of Olives, the whole crowd of disciples began joyfully to praise God in loud voices for all the miracles they had seen. Here's what they yelled and sang: "Blessed is the King who comes. In the name of the Lord, peace in heaven, glory in the highest." They just can't help themselves anymore. They just break out into this song. And it's a song, "Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord, peace in heaven, glory." And that song does not resonate with me in the slightest, in the sense of it being a song that I would connect with, right? It's from the Old Testament. It's from Psalm 118. These people knew this song by heart. They didn't have to read it on a page. They knew it. They had sung it. They would sing it every year at their feasts and at their festivals. They knew this song by heart. And so they've got all this energy, all this fervor, and they just break out into this song altogether. Here's what it reminds me of. It reminds me of you're at a sporting event, right? And it's a timeout, or it's in between innings at a baseball game, and the PA announcer knows that he's got to keep the crowd engaged. And so what does he do? He starts playing music that everybody knows. And the one that came to my mind is Neil Diamond. And he starts playing the chorus of this song. Hands touching hands, reaching out, touching you, touching me. Sweet Caroline. See, you don't even have to be able to sing, and you're in it, right like that. That's how these people were with this song, except it's a religious, they're super fired up, energetic about, that's exactly what's going on. They would sing this song every year in the desperate hope that their king, their Messiah, would come and rescue them. At this time, they're right, because here he is right there with them. And so the crowd, they get to the crest of the Mount of Olives, and they celebrate. They're super excited. But they still don't understand. They still don't understand. They're singing the right song. They're singing it for the wrong reason. They think they finally get it. So they're loud and they're emotional and they're confident. And they're right about who he was. But they're wrong about what it meant. Because they wanted what? They wanted a king who would come into Jerusalem and take control. Jesus was coming as a king who would not take, but as a king who would give. They missed it. Even the bad guys missed it. The Pharisees. There's some Pharisees in the crowd. And they don't see Jesus as king, right? And so all this hoopla, everything that's happening is ticking them off. Verse 39, there's some Pharisees in the crowd. And they said to Jesus, teacher, not king. He's not king to them. Teacher, rebuke your disciples. And Jesus, I tell you, he replied, if my disciples keep quiet, the stones will cry out instead. In other words, you Pharisees, you're wrong. You don't understand. You don't get it. The Pharisees missed him too, right? From the other side, right? All the crowd is for him. All the Pharisees are against him, and they're wrong too. Jesus says, hey, if my people don't shout, the rocks are going to do it instead. The Pharisees missed it. Here's one of the things I think about with these Pharisees being in this picture. You don't get to stay neutral with a king. You don't get to stay neutral with a king. You don't get to decide whether Jesus is king. He's king whether you want it or not. What you do get to decide is how you're going to respond to that, how you'll choose to respond to that. The Pharisees in this crowd, middle of the cheers and shouts, they made their own choice. There's one other jarring thing in my mind that happens as we go further. So they're up top of the hill. They start to come down towards Jerusalem. Verse 41. As Jesus approached Jerusalem and saw this city laid out all before him, he wept over it. And he said, Jerusalem, if you, even you, had only known on this day what would bring you peace, if you'd only known. But now it's hidden from your eyes. He says, the days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment against you and encircle you and hem you in on every side. He said, they will dash you to the ground, you and the children within your walls. They will not leave one stone on another. It's a prophecy that he's making that comes true 30 or 40 years later when the Romans surround Jerusalem and they tear apart stone by stone, not one left on top of another. Why, Jesus says? Because you did not recognize the time of God's coming to you. I want you to think about this for a minute. It's jarring. He's in the middle of a giant crowd that's singing and shouting for him and laying out the red carpet and super excited. And they're surging around, and what's Jesus do? He bursts into tears. Bursts into tears. Mark Moore says that word for bursting into tears, he says he burst into deep sobs. In the middle of this crowd that's cheering for him, he bursts into sobs. It's like sobs from the gut, sobs you don't like to hear. That's what Jesus does. It's the kind you hear at the funeral home. That's what Jesus does. In the middle of this crowd, while the crowd's celebrating, Jesus weeps. Why? He says, because the king came and stood right in front of you, and they missed him. You did not recognize, he said, the time of God's coming to you. Here's the craziest thing of all, and this kind of takes it back to the beginning. John, in his account of this triumphal entry, chapter 12, verse 16, here's what John says. John says, at first, Jesus' disciples did not understand all this. Only after Jesus was glorified, after he was resurrected and ascended to heaven, only after he was glorified, did they realize that these things had been written about him and that these things had been done to him. In other words, as all of this is happening, this whole triumphal scene, this whole thing is happening, the 12 guys who knew him best, the 12 guys who had spent 3 years with him, right, 24/7, doing what he does, following after, the 12 guys who knew him best, they missed it too. They didn't understand. John was one of them. He's one of those 12. He said, we didn't get it. We didn't understand what was happening until afterward. They were disoriented and baffled and confused, and they didn't get it. In other words, like I said at the beginning, you can be this close to the king and still miss him. That's a challenge for me. Maybe it's the same thing as you. I want a king who fixes everything fast. I want a king who takes my pain away like that. And I want a king who makes my path smooth in whatever I'm doing or wherever I want to go. And I want a king who stops injustice once and for all, right now. That's what I want. I want a king who's going to give me super clear instructions about what's next in my life. God, what am I supposed to do tomorrow? What am I supposed to do next month? What am I supposed to do? That's the kind of king I want. But instead of that, we get a king who rides a donkey. And we get a king who waits patiently for the right time. And we get a king who walks a path that we don't always understand, that I don't always understand. Jesus is a king who comes in humility, and what that does is it reveals our expectations of him. Jesus is a king who doesn't seize power. He doesn't take. He restrains his power. Jesus is a king who doesn't force you into obedience. He's not going to make you do anything. He's going to give you space to choose. Jesus is a king who doesn't eliminate our suffering. He doesn't take our pain away all the time, but he steps into it. And he's still king, even if you don't understand what he's doing. I've been thinking a lot recently about this whole idea of understanding God for some reason. And something that I keep coming back to over and over and over is this. If you only trust Jesus when you understand him, do you really trust him? Maybe that seems kind of obvious to you, but if you only trust Jesus when you understand him, maybe you don't really trust him. It's easy to trust Jesus when we're pretty sure what's going to happen, when we're reasonably certain about what the outcome is going to be. I'll give you examples. It's easy to trust Jesus when obedience doesn't cost you anything. It's a lot harder when obedience means you might lose your job, or you might lose a friendship, or you might lose some little bit of comfort. It's easy to trust Jesus when, with forgiveness, for instance, when the other person seems genuinely remorseful. It's easy to trust Jesus with forgiveness. It's a lot harder to trust Jesus with forgiveness when the other person isn't sorry at all. It's easy to trust Jesus with my money when I got lots left over. It's hard to trust Jesus with my money when I only have a few dollars in the bank. If you only trust Jesus when you understand him, maybe you don't really trust him. I think of some Bible characters. I think of Abraham taking a long hike up a mountain with his son, young son Isaac, walking behind him. And Isaac is carrying the wood for the fire that's going to be put on the altar to sacrifice Isaac. I think of Abraham. I think of John the Baptizer telling Jesus, or not Jesus, but telling King Herod what he didn't want to hear. And I think of sometimes how it works out for your benefit in this life, and sometimes how it doesn't, because Abraham, he got his son Isaac spared. He became the father of a mighty nation. And John the Baptist, John the Baptizer, he was beheaded. I think of my friend Tom. I don't think any of you know him. He found out that his company was crooked. And he chose to willingly give up a very, very high-paying job for it. I think of some of you who've had rocky marriages in the past year or the past couple of years. But you kept grinding at it, and you kept asking God to work in it. I think of some of you who have been through very, very difficult physical issues in the last few years, or diseases, or hard things. I know that some of our folks are at home today. They literally can't be here because they can't hardly walk. And they pray, and they pray, and they pray, and I know there's times when you feel like your prayers aren't being heard, but you keep praying anyways. It's when you don't understand Him, and when you don't know what's coming next, that's when you really find out if you trust Him or not. One thing I know is true about this whole triumphal entry thing. Jesus, the King, sees what you and I can't. Jesus stood on that road at the crest of the Mount of Olives. All these thousands of people around Him cheering for Him. And He stood there looking down at Jerusalem. And everybody else thought that they knew where that road led. They thought it led to glory for Israel and freedom for their people and the dawn of a new era and a new kingdom. But Jesus saw down that road what none of them saw, right? Jesus saw what none of them saw up ahead. He saw what was waiting for Him on Friday. He knew it. He looked down from the Mount of Olives, and He saw the cross in the middle of the triumphal entry. And He went anyway. Isn't that awesome? He went anyway. A king who's willing to walk that path is a king that you can be willing to follow, and that I can be willing to follow, because He knows where your road leads. Even if you don't, He'll walk it with you. And I'll finish up with this. When Jesus doesn't do what you expect, can you still trust Him? Yeah, you can. Because the King who sometimes confuses you and sometimes baffles me, and I don't always see what He's doing in my life, that King, He sees what I can't. And so I would just encourage you, I would challenge you to trust Him, even when it doesn't make sense, even when you feel like you're on the wrong road, even when you feel like it's a wrong path, because He knows exactly where it leads. Jesus knows where your path goes, and He will walk that with you. That's your thought for Palm Sunday. I hope it encourages you. Let me pray for you. God, I'm so thankful for your Son, and that you sent Him, and you sent Him before the creation of the world. You had this lined out for Him, and He knew it was coming even before the earth was here. And you sent Him in spite of knowing what was ahead. You sent Him because of what was ahead. You sent Him, Lord, because you knew that we would blow it, that we would choose to be takers. And Eve and Adam, they chose for us, but we know that we would have done the same. And so we're thankful that you sent a way to bring us back into a relationship with you. We're thankful that you acted in a way that we never would have imagined, that we could never have seen in a million years. But you saw, and you made a way for that to happen. God, I'm so thankful for Jesus and the difference that He makes in my life. God, I'm so thankful that you are a God, and He is a Son that we can trust, and we can trust to walk with us on the path that we're on. God, we pray for eyes to see clearly what's happening. And we want to be wise and be discernful and be able to understand what's happening in our world today. But God, we don't always. We just don't. Even those of us who love you with all of our hearts, we don't always get it. But we trust and know that you do. And God, that you will walk on that path with us. So thank you for that. Thank you for being a God who cares, and thank you for being a king who is in charge. We love you so much, and we bow down our lives to you today. In Jesus' name, amen.